The following is a conversation between Brian Shield and myself. Today, Brian makes a big announcement. We showcase his guest appearance on DisrupTV, and we introduce a new fun segment called The Sprint. If you noticed, it's been a minute since we published our last episode, and I gotta tell you, this was not by design. Today, we touch on the many fun challenges of producing a podcast, including the podcast we had to reshoot completely that would have aired before this one had it not been for the technical meltdown that we experienced. I'll add here also that I find it fascinating as I step back and observe ourselves really, wrestle with the self-critique that comes with this kind of endeavor. All the personal maturations we go through, the I hate it when my eyes do that, I'm smiling too much, that one's me, I got to stop doing this and that and the other thing. If you've ever had public speaking coaching where they film you for the purposes of critique, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Only here, it's on the published stage. And I can tell you that while we've had our fits and starts, the support and outpouring that we've received from this community has been truly inspiring. And so we thank you and reaffirm our commitment to get better each episode and to bring you the highest value information and learning that we can possibly deliver. And now, my conversation with Brian.
How are you ready?
I am so ready. Countdown 3.
I don't know how those companies effectively stay in business in the future.
What you two are doing is a boundless mindset.
Thinking that you weren't going to have to learn a lot. Well, you made a huge mistake.
The one place I feel safe geeking out is
It's
here.
here.
There's a reason why we chose technology and not marketing.
Hey. Good morning and welcome back to episode 3, maybe 4, or maybe 4, maybe 3 of the CIO project. We recorded a great show with a CIO, CEO, CXO extraordinaire, Rob Strickland, and we absolutely had the most crazy technical challenges, and we're actually going to re-record that one. So this was going to be next, but we'll probably shoot this. We'll probably air this one first.
Yeah, we're out of order
sh-
already. It was like a walkie-talkie moment. I think I had a half a second delay in audio. So, anyways, we're working out the kinks, but we've got an excellent sound engineer. We'll get
For those of you who are considering doing podcasts or anything like this, I highly encourage it. It is an amazing experience and you're going to learn a lot. I will say, though, it is a heavy lift. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of details. The devil's in the details. And so we're having a good time with it and we're learning a ton as we go. So today I'm joined by my co-host again, CIO extraordinaire, Brian Shield, who I can no longer say is the CIO of the Boston Red Sox. But first, we have a few updates, so we'll get back to that in a minute. Really want to thank everybody who supported our podcast launch. The outpouring has been overwhelming and inspiring. So thanks again to everybody. And I also want to announce that we have our website fired up. You can find us now at thecioproject.com. You can watch our released episodes there, learn more about our hosts and guests, and drop us a line with any questions or topics you would like us to tackle in our upcoming episodes. I know that was something, Brian, that you were really excited about, to get input from the audience about, hey, what do you want to hear? What do you want to learn? Who do you want to see, right?
Absolutely. And we're already hearing from a number of folks. So we very much encourage your feedback. We'll design future shows around your thoughts and insights. And our goal is to kind of make this, topical and relevant and adaptable. So we'll continue to kind of flow a little bit as we get your insights and we kind of make things exciting and hopefully enjoyable for all of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we would love to hear from you. Again, thecioproject.com. Okay, next, a little announcement. Brian, you want to let everybody know you've had a little change in your life recently?
I have. I made the decision, recently to, leave the Red Sox after 13 seasons, as we say in sports, and 13 amazing seasons, I should probably say. And I've now taken a job as CEO for the Safeguard Products International down in Atlanta, sort of my second home, if you will, where I spent 20 years here, formerly leading technology for the Weather Channel companies. And so I'm super excited about this opportunity. I love my colleagues and the company and everything that we've done together. And but to me, I'm starting to look for another change, like with the next challenge. And I found an incredibly great opportunity with great people and exceptional leadership and ownership. And my wife and I have made the decision to to pivot and to, try the next journey. So we're really, really excited about all that. And I'll share some, insights a little bit along the way about that journey. Because, every company, has their own challenges, if you will. And,
Right.
and I'll tell you my first initial insights. No matter what company you go to, there's so many things that are the same. I mean, you look at some of the challenges, whether it's dealing with legacy issues or how to best structure an organization for long-term success, or how do we, pivot so that we're more competitive in certain areas and things like that. So a lot of the same things, but, but lots of differences as well. And so we'll kind of incorporate some of those insights, I guess, along the way. But
Yeah,
super
it's
excited to be here with everyone. But go ahead, Harvey. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Interesting to me that you were with the Weather Channel, what, 14 years prior to that, right? And then
Mhm.
13 years with the Red Sox. That's actually a really long tenure for the average CIO. I'd be interested to find out. I should do a quick Grok or Chat GPT on what the average stint of a CIO is. Because 13
Well,
years is a long time.
it's a lot longer than it used to be. Let's just say that, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
like, the careers over days of a couple of years. I'm glad to report I don't want to say
Behind us.
complete distant past, but they're out there, but they are, however, a reminder. And I think we might have talked about this in one of the other podcasts, but it's a reminder that, this field changes incredibly rapidly. And
Hmm.
so it's really, really important that you continue to sort of evolve your skills and the skills of your team and things like that. So, if you're adapting and, you've got hopefully strong leadership skills, then I think you can kind of weather the transitions that are going to be taking place or have been taking place over the years.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. 1 second. Having a little technical difficulty there myself. So yeah, exciting. It'll be interesting to talk about. Like you said, every company has their challenges. There's new stuff to tackle here, and to the extent that you can share it, it's going to be very interesting as we go forward over the next year or two with the show and with everything that's going on at the ranch there. So recently you were on Disrupt TV with our first guest, Vala Afshar, who is just an amazing guest for us as we launch the podcast. Vala Afshar and Ray Wang are this co-host of Disrupt TV. Brian, can you tell us a little bit more about Vala and Ray and what they have going on there?
Oh yeah. So if you're not familiar with Disrupt TV, tune in. They do an amazing job. Val and Ray have
Hmm.
some remarkable guests and thought leaders and really people who I tune in regularly. And so for me, it's just another source for how do you stay, current with what's going on in this rapidly kind of changing environment. Ray's part of Constellation Research, and
Hmm.
I encourage you to read that newsletter. It comes out, I think, weekly, and packed full of what's going on, what's happening. Before we
Right.
jumped on this morning, Howie and I were talking about another segment that, or another area that we're asking future guests is a little bit of how they stay current. Because I think one
Mm.
of the challenges all of us have with this rapidly changing world of ours, and just a reminder, it's never going to be this slow again, that how do you stay current? How do you keep things fresh? And what's your technique? Because we all have to have our little bit of secret sauce. And these are things, by the way, too, that it's pivotal that as you're learning these, that you're and ensuring that they're kind of embodied in your leadership teams and further down the organization. Because while so oftentimes we consider as part of our jobs to stay current, oftentimes I think folks in our teams can get a little bit so I don't necessarily say complacent, but fixated on whatever it is that
Mm.
they're working on. So we owe it to them to think about their respective careers. We're going to talk more about that today too. But one last thing on the Vala thing. So I talked about Ray, and he's remarkable.
Right.
The other thing about Vala, and he was one of our guests, so you can start. I encourage you to tune into our last episode if you haven't. But he's super high energy, such a great guy, thought leader, chief digital evangelist or chief digital strategist, I believe it is, for Salesforce.
Yep.
And but really just the consummate professional. He's working on his third book, which is coming out incredibly shortly, Autonomous,
Yeah. Yeah.
that follows Boundless, which, again, if you haven't read Boundless, that is a great book. And
Yeah.
again, as we're talking about ways in which you can kind of stay current with what's going on, this next one, Autonomous, talks quite a bit about sort of the organizations of the future and which ones are going to be most successful, and how do you build sort of AI infused mindset. So an AI, very much an AI first approach toward how you basically do things. as opposed to sort of bolting on AI. How do we kind of, embrace it at the beginning, if you will? And so Vala, thought leader, extraordinaire and good friend of ours. And again, I was very honored to be a guest on their show.
Yeah, I think you can pre-order Autonomous, Vala Afshar, Henry King, Autonomous, Why the Fittest Businesses Embrace AI-First Strategies in Digital Labor. So we have it up on the screen here for those of you who are watching. For those of you who are listening, give it a whirl, see if you guys can pick that up. So right on. On that topic, you were on the show, and Vala asked you about what's dominating CIO's energy and concerns in today's business climate. And I'd love to play that here.
You're leading this community. What are these folks talking about? What are the challenges and opportunities that's keeping them, maybe, I don't want to say up at night, but enhancing the sense of urgency they have in terms of how they run their business?
Well, yeah, thanks. It would be easy to say, Gen AI, because I think, everyone does. And that's absolutely there. I think it's also, there's a certain sentiment around business anxiety right now, too, in the sense of, where's the market going? And I mean, if the stock market continues to, go up, but I think there's like trepidation, among CFOs and other, C-suite leaders and things. And I think, it's interesting as you dig into like generative AI and we look at sort of solving problems with AI. I mean, they absolutely represent incredibly great opportunities for us, as companies to solve problems and make people more efficient and productive and things. They also cost real money. And I think we're undergoing sort of a parallel path, just like my analogy back to mobile apps, if you will, in terms of like a little bit of epiphany model. I feel like we're back at when cloud started and, where everybody jumped on the cloud at different stages. But once they get on there, then they kind of realize, oh, we should probably do FinOps. So we can actually understand how much this stuff costs, right? And I feel like, the equivalent of like AI ops is like a real deal now, right? Because you can spawn a lot of work and do a lot of things. And if you don't have methodology, you really want to make sure that return on investment is legit, and the whole adage of fail fast is, needs to be ever more present, if you will.
So it's
So I love how you didn't necessarily lead with Gen AI, right? Because we needed to go down that path. Can you talk more about where you went with this, the business anxiety and trepidation that kind of goes along with Fella's question?
Yeah, I mean, I think even the best of times, even the greatest bull markets, there's always some level of anxiety in organizations, if you will. I think right now there's probably a bit more. I mean, not all the indicators are all positive, obviously. And so,
Right.
And there's other elements out there that, we're now much more global world, everything's global. Like so we have to be much more mindful of what's happening elsewhere, if you will, when we start thinking about our investments. I mean, COVID was a great reminder of just the importance and the impact to our supply chains. And so all those things now kind of come into play, if you will. My point to Vala on that show was more just that, there is that trepidation a little bit, I think, in most companies these days. I think it's sort of, people have sort of a cautiously optimistic mindset, but a little bit of emphasis around the cautious part, right now.
Right,
so,
right.
so I think that's all I was really getting to. And I think relative to Gen AI, just my last comment there, I think it's, we have now kind of gone through the grace period where I think leaders sort of were encouraging everyone to get into AI, learn it, experiment, figure out what works, what doesn't work, and all those wonderful things. Now we're kind of back at sort of, I'll characterize it more the business as usual phase, which is how do you run a good project? What are the appropriate guardrails? What are the right processes you want to have? And, how much are we spending for these things? And are we failing fast, as we were referencing in that last clip, and things. So.
Yeah, and I would argue too that we're still learning so much about like how this works and what's working and what's not working, and we're going to actually get into that more later in this segment. So
Well,
then,
Howie, one last
yeah, go
thing
ahead.
I'd say too there, the AI, the problem, the challenge for us, if you will, is if you're listening to this and you're a technology leader or aspiring technology leader, is that the AI cost structure is still being baked. I mean, it used to be we paid a license fee. We used to buy the licenses. Like, so now we've evolved to like pretty much everything's a SaaS model. which is
Right.
fine. And so we've kind of, but now it's like you've got kind of AI thrown in a lot of cases, AI thrown in where you're not even sure you know what the value of the AI is. I mean, some things are
Exactly.
very discrete AI. Okay, you're using, open AI, you know what you're doing. But other products, third-party products, it's baked in. I mean, when you start paying a compute cost for some things that you used to take for granted, I think there's going to be, I don't know, a reckoning, if you will, because
Oh yeah.
so there's a lot going on there, and so trying to predict future budgets and the
Yeah.
impact and compute costs and cloud costs and other sort of things. You'll if you're a larger company, you already have this, but if you don't,
Hmm.
you're definitely at some point going to have a human assigned to understanding your cost basis, both the FinOps, AI ops, and other costs that are variable.
Right, right, right. Because right now we're just, again, we're learning, right? So, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I had a little pet project, and the next thing I know, I ran out of tokens, and and the thing.
Right,
So,
right, exactly, exactly.
I think just a lot of things we're learning around this right now. So then Vala asked you about the pressures on CIOs, which I found
Mhm.
super interesting. Let's play it here.
How much more pressure on CIOs today versus 5 years ago?
I'd say a lot more.
I know there's a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah.
CIOs I connect with,
Yeah, please.
they're expected to know a lot about a lot. And I don't know if that's fair, but it is what it is.
Yeah, when you think back when someone coined the term, CIO career is over, part of that, if you think back on it, like it's literally one of the only jobs in the C-suite that has a rapid change, right? It used to be you were considered good or adequate if you could kind of keep the lights on, and then as that bar keeps changing, the nature of the kind of skills required changes, and not all of us are adept at being chameleons in some respect. Some are operationally oriented, some, chase emerging technologies, some are good in the boardroom, right? And so kind of knowing the right skill discipline and characteristics that are best for your business, I think is part of the challenge.
All right. Vala's statement, CIOs are expected to know a lot about a lot. What are your thoughts about that? Because it's really true. There is just no end to the amount of initiatives and projects and segments of the business that CIOs are involved in today, because everything revolves around technology.
Yeah, if you think back not that many years ago, I'll say 15, 20, right? The CIO knew, I would argue, had limited visibility exposure to cyber. I mean, the biggest companies, financial
Right. Yeah.
services and
Yeah.
others, absolutely they did, but it was still evolving. I'm thinking back to my time at the Weather Channel and working with our CISO. I mean, yeah, we had firewalls and we had other things, but it was really early stage stuff. And so you think how much of a part of your job that is now as a effective CIO, and then you kind of throw AI on it, and it's another little log on the fire, but a big log, because now it's not just this sort of sometimes like not highly visible, the cyber elements, not highly visible elements in terms of how we're running an effective cybersecurity kind of program for an organization or training and things. But now AI is front and center, and everyone's using it, and it's the ultimate shadow IT, if you will. And so it's big and bright and in your face, and it's another. If you think back, just 3-4 years ago, it was really a very very discrete tool for the technology organization. We used AI mostly in the form of machine learning and other sort of elements, to do things, but it wasn't generative AI, and it wasn't ubiquitous and available to everyone, if you will, in terms of how they could leverage it in their own personal and professional lives and things.
Sure.
And so, anyways, without doing anything, you just added 2 big chunks of work to your normal, however your portfolio of services you perform. And to me, I look at that as like grace, because to me, it's more challenge, it's more opportunities to learn and things like that. But it
Yeah.
comes, it comes
It's
with
real work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. And
It's
people
real
have
work. Yeah.
expectations that you're staying on it. And,
Yeah.
because everyone's enamored by it, they're all reading about the same things that only you used to read about, right? So you get your little pop-up, and someone will be like, you'll be in a board meeting, or you could be in an executive steering committee meeting, and someone's like, yeah, I saw where Meta just hired, a few more, scientists from OpenAI or something else, or they'll start talking about some investments with data centers in different states, and I think my mind, you're expected to have points of view in these things. So, anyways,
100%. I mean, it really is like when the internet started to become mainstream, right? Because I was out last night with a young man that you know really well, and he was asking me about the origins of my career, and he's like, "Yeah, you go back to the beginning, right?" Nothing like making like being with a young person in their 20s and them making you feel ancient. But I was like, "Yeah, I was at Sun Microsystems when the internet was present, right? It had been there for a while, and Sun, a lot of people don't know. Well, you'd have to have been in the business a little while to remember who Sun was, but Sun was one of the biggest players in the IT field along with Cisco and Oracle, and like they were like the big four horsemen at the time. And I worked for Sun, and Sun stands for Stanford University Networks, and Stanford was one of the original hubs for the internet, right? And so I was there early on when the internet was being used, but it was being used really at a corporate level, but not by all corporations, more like in the education and scientific field and everything. And then all of a sudden, it just took off. And this feels a lot like that, right? This feels a lot like that. And like, how many years ago was that? That was like the mid 80s. I can't even do the math that fast, right? Like, is that 40?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was
Yeah.
80s, and then the 90s. But
Yeah, the
it's
90s is when it really went mainstream, right? Like,
in my mind, kind of speaks to adaptability. Because if you think
okay.
back to those days with Scott McNeely and team, and I was a huge Sun guy too, and I loved,
Yeah, I remember. That's how we met. Yeah.
yeah, totally. And I was a big Solaris person and all that.
Yep.
And I remember back in the day just thinking like open source it. Like, when Red Hat came out and, effectively open sourced Unix some level, it's like, and Sun held on to Solaris, and they would argue they didn't, but they did. They did to everyone that used it, and and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I remember I make these decisions like, okay, I can either have, like 6 or 12 or 20 Spark 6000s, then pay a massive amount of money, or I can get hundreds of low cost blades, load them up, and some fail, no problem. I just kind of, I have a portfolio model. And so, it is sort of another great history lesson on terms of stability. But
yep, 100%. Now, the other thing you guys touched on in the conversation with Vela is about the CIOs. Like there was a long period there where CIOs needed to know the business. They really, one of their charges was that they really needed to understand the business. And now it kind of seems to be turning and it's the other way around, where the C-suite individuals really need to start to understand the technology. And I know at the Red Sox we went through the Red Sox was baseball, right? It really wasn't a technology company, right?
Sure.
Where in contrast, Safeguard is really a technology company, right? Providing
it's an auto insurance business, but I mean, like every company is a technology company in some ways
today. Yeah,
yes.
Today.
And no company is immune by the value that technology brings to them. I think but that point though is really important if you think about it, because all of us that grew up kind of like how we over the years and have been technology thought leaders, or hopefully thought leaders for a period of time, we kind of were trained that like job number one is to learn the business. And I'm happy to report that every CIO I know understands that. Like any successful, I should say, CIO knows that. Like it's no longer like like is it some hotshot software developer who can write great code but doesn't understand much about the business, who becomes successful as a CIO or CTO. Sometimes maybe the CTO, but the point is, CIOs did embrace the business, and they do to this day, and they realize it is still job number one to understand the business, because fundamentally we're designing solutions to kind of advance our company. And then we actually really, really have to understand the business, because not only do we understand how we operate today, but how it can or should operate in the future, so we can align technology. Because I think the one thing we're all very cognizant of as technology leaders is we don't want to be the long pole in the tent. Like we don't want to be when the company pivots and says, oh my goodness, we want to move to a SaaS solution, that you're like, we are so ill prepared. Like, you just don't want to be those folks. So in my mind, you're expected to have sort of the next 2 to 3, 4 years, at least in some level of specificity, sort of in the back of your mind as you're thinking about it. But going back to your question, sorry, a little winded there, is I also think, though, there's an expectation in my mind a little bit that the business needs to understand the technology. I think we've gone too far a little bit where business leadership teams, had I'll say, let's use the metaphor of the iceberg, where they understood kind of what was above the surface, and that maybe was sufficient. The
Hmm.
reality, though, is with things like AI, with cybersecurity, with rapidly changing environments, with the challenges of retaining and attracting talent and other sort of things. Just ask OpenAI and Meta about how
Right.
important talent is. It's like there needs to be a much greater understanding and awareness of kind of how the sausage is made, of like what does it take
Right.
to build these
Hmm.
tools so that
Yeah.
so we can, when your CIO comes to visit you, or the CFO or somebody, and asks for money and things, that there's a general understanding of what does it take to kind of run the business of technology in a
Right.
successful business and things like that. So I think there's a little bit of a pivot. And I think the best companies realize that, it's a shared responsibility. It's also a responsibility on the CIO and their team to educate. Much, much greater opportunity than it used to be. I think many of us have a tendency to focus on our work, and we can sometimes become two heads down in the work that we do. And we need to
Right.
realize that, you know, we are entrusted with an incredible responsibility, to take care of our companies, their
Yeah.
technology environments, and equally, it's our responsibility to educate and to inform both senior leaderships, other executives, and the board
Hmm.
about risk, about opportunity, and about this changing environment that we're living in.
Yeah. And it strikes me that, like, inherently, IT organizations, we're really bad at telling our own story. Right. Because, like you said, we're heads down. Technology is what our thing is. We're not marketers, right? We don't tell our story very good. And it's interesting because Vela, because we're on the subject of our conversation
Yeah,
with Vela, his title is Chief Evangelist, right, for Salesforce. And so that's what he's out doing. And it strikes me that IT organizations kind of almost need that function, right? Just somebody needs to kind of wear that hat to be able to tell the story in the quest of really helping educate the customer base that they serve, right?
yeah. You do need to have almost a PR mindset a little bit. Not, and
Yeah.
if and I don't expect always, like, I know that's probably not my forte, but
Hmm.
as you're building your team, you do need to have complementary components. And I think one of them is how do we tell the story? How do we educate internally?
Hmm.
Um, I mean, maybe externally, depending upon the nature of your business, but certainly internally. And and I think you're right. Those are oftentimes skills that are not exercised, too often.
Right. And it's funny how all this ties back into the CIO needs to know a lot about a lot, and they're handling a lot, including telling the own story and really handling their own PR. So super, super interesting.
Yeah.
So, all right, everybody, we're really excited. We have a new segment for you. We call it the Sprint. The Sprint is a rundown of topics that are in the news or topics that might be harder to find unless you're a big time CIO like our friend Brian here and have access to secret news. Dun dun dun. So what I'm going to do here in this segment is, or what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a quick overview of the topics that we're going to run down, and then we'll go back and we'll hit each one. Ready?
I'm
And I
ready.
got
Let's
some
do it.
some cool backgrounds to go with this. I'm all proud of
I
our
thought you were going to play
engineering
some
here.
background music. I thought it was going to be like some, musical lead in, Howie.
Oh, now the challenge is down. Yeah. So in our next one, we'll have to have some music to go with it. So, so here's our rundown,
All right.
real quick. All right, the first topic is a Gartner report that says that IT leaders struggle in understanding when and when not to apply generative AI or Gen AI for their use cases, and that the hype surrounding Gen AI can lead them to apply it where it is not a good fit, increasing the risk of higher complexity and failure in their AI projects. And Brian's got some insight there. Number two, AI in the White House. There was a recent White House AI action plan entitled Winning the AI Race, America's AI Action Plan. It purportedly does three things. So we'll dive into these three things as well and talk about what this means to us. Number three, Recent TechCrunch article about OpenAI's quest to make AI do anything for you. Well, I've got some comments about that one. Maybe a little rant to go with it. Number 4, the talent code. If you listen to our first podcast, Brian talked about what I believe to be job number 1 for successful CIO, which is really to attract, develop, and retain talent. Brian has some important follow-up on this uber critical factor. And numero 5. Yes, we couldn't help ourselves. Astronomer. At the risk of beating this one to death, we're going to try and provide everybody our insights from really a leadership standpoint to this, and what I'll classify as a tale as old as time. This is really a classic event, so we'll get back to that. All right, let's jump in.
Sure.
Gen AI, when not to. So the recent Gartner report that was written by Linar Ramos, Ben Yan, Haritha Kandabadu, and Gabriel Rigon. Boy, they didn't make these were not names that were easy to roll off the tongue, but I hope I didn't butcher them too much. In this report, they quote, IT leaders struggle in understanding when and when not to apply generative AI for their use cases. The hype surrounding Gen AI can lead them to apply it where it is not a good fit, increasing the risk of higher complexity and failure in their AI projects. They go on to say that although this rapid adoption is promising, it also entails the risk of Gen AI overshadowing the broader AI space. For many organizations, our business units, Gen AI will be their first experience with AI and will start conflating Gen AI with general AI. However, Gen AI is only a small part of the AI landscape. The message here, armed with a Gen AI hammer, everything is a Gen AI nail. Now, they go on to illustrate how Gen AI fits into one of 6 AI modalities. So these 6, the way that they have it illustrated, include Gen AI is one of them, and this is not in any order, it's more in a circle. Non-Gen AI machine learning, simulation, optimization, rules, and graphs. So this was really, really interesting to me, Brian. I think first it would be helpful for me and maybe some of our audience if you explain Gen AI just in general, in the way that maybe you define it.
Sure. I think when people think about Gen AI, the most important initial, element is the first 3 letters there, Gen. Gen is
Okay.
generative, right? So generative means, it's actually building something. If you think about, like at least I'll say my use of AI in the past, which was heavily focused around machine learning, it was more about forecasting. It was more about sampling and more about sort of leveraging data in predicting results and things like that. It wasn't about creating new content in some respects. It was basically, yes, you can forecast things, you can make informed decisions, you can do other elements of it. And there's different, as you heard, there's different levels of AI, if you will, non-generative AI. But in generative AI, if you think about it, it's about making new things, whether those new things are text or it's audio or video or a song or you name it type of thing, code, software. It's like
Okay.
those are novel new concepts that are only enabled because of these massive amounts of data that have been consumed. I mean, we look at sort of what the power it takes to kind of run some of these incredible models, if you will, and it's remarkable how we got here. And by the way, I'm a massive fan. But it is different. It's different than, I'll say, AI in the past. And I think, as everyone knows who's a technologist, one of the challenges in our field is that we have a natural tendency to overuse the same words.
Yeah,
we're
right.
doing data warehousing forever, and it's big data, and it's this, it's that, and then everyone gets confused again as whether we're talking about the same things. And I think AI, unfortunately, has kind of fallen victim to the same issue. And there's a lot of other elements about generative AI, but I think, what's really, really important in that article is that as you're a technologist, is as you start thinking about the problem that you're trying to solve, the use cases that you're trying to solve, be very mindful of, the expression you made, like, kind of armed with a hammer, everything's a nail. Don't assume. It's very, 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 very tempting to assume that generative AI is the answer to every AI use case. And it absolutely is not. And also, it's use it where it makes sense. So I think, what the article goes on to talk about, which I thought was really well written, it goes on to talk about, like, it's really, really important that you kind of categorize your use cases and your need, and make sure that it's in alignment. It does a nice job too of talking about where there's sort of kind of a low level of integration, if you will, between generative AI and the problem you're trying to solve. So it goes through a fairly thoughtful, I thought, analysis of where it makes the most sense. And to me, again, as I think we said at the very outset of this conversation, it's like we've kind of now gone from that honeymoon phase, if you will, with AI, generative AI, I should say, or AI in general, really, but I'll say generative AI because it's so new, to now where there's like an expectation of maturity. Like, not that the products are all mature, but we as professionals should be mature. Like, assess the use cases, understand their value, understand the tool you're using. What does
Right.
success look like? How, from our years of
Hmm.
working together, it's, I think one of the problems we often run into is we don't define success at the beginning. And so as a result of it, you don't always know when you're done, or you
Hmm.
see the expression before, like, fail fast. Well,
Yeah.
you can fail fast when you can measure where you are versus where you aspire to be. The challenge sometimes is people never define where they want to be. And so there's this natural tendency, like almost like an artist, if you will, that they never stop
Yeah.
painting, right? There's got to be
Yeah.
those, like, kind of like pencils down moments where somebody, reflects on, where you are, and, are you hitting the goals you aspire to be, or are they even achievable?
Right. It's funny. I don't know. This is going to be a crazy analogy, but I'm having this moment of there's an old comedian by the name of Richard Pryor, which I think even today most people would know who Richard Pryor was. He was, really a groundbreaker in the comedy world, when he came up during mostly the 70s. But Richard Pryor had a drug addiction, unfortunately, which eventually did him in. But during his ups and downs, he was interviewed about the problem that he was having. And he said, and I always remember this, he always said, the problem with me is I can never say no to a party. Right. And that always
Yeah.
struck me as really funny. And I've used that analogy in technology. I think the problem with us is we get enamored by certain things and technologies, right? And so it's like we can't say no to a party. We get a promising technology, a bright, shiny object. It gets introduced to us. We have a problem that we're trying to solve. We get excited about a technology that can solve that problem. And at the moment, it's very clear. Okay, I can use this to solve this problem. However, things aren't usually that simple, and they don't, to your whole point, fail fast. They don't necessarily roll out the way that we have it in our minds. And the next thing you know, we can be 2, 3, 4 months, 5 months down the line, and we didn't really stop to define success. We didn't really stop to figure out what the cost was going to be and what the return on investment was going to be, and all of those kinds of things. And so we find ourselves clawing back. And I think that I see a lot of this going on right now with just AI in general.
Yeah, in our careers, we have dozens and dozens and dozens of examples like this in some respects, if
Hmm.
you think about
Yeah.
it, like whether it's sort of evaluating cloud technology early on. It also speaks to the really important element of knowing where you want to be on sort of the maturity curve.
Hmm.
Are you trying to really be, like an industry leader? Are you trying to be a fast follower or a strategic follower? It's like you really have to assess those things, because generative AI opens up, I'll say Pandora's box here a little bit, to kind of give all of us the opportunity to be what we think are leaders in these spaces. But leadership,
Hmm.
what's the expression? Like, not everyone in every company is prepared to be a leader in a certain space. Sometimes it's prudent to be a fast follower, or even a laggard in certain cases.
Right, right. Most pioneers usually end up face down with arrows in their back, right? I
Yeah,
think that's
there
kind of
is
where you
where I
were
was
going.
going. Thank you for
Yeah.
saving me on the that expression.
Yeah. As it just rapidly evolves, it's almost every layer of evolution, you're a pioneer.
I looked a lot at low code, as a former developer, and
Hmm.
and it keeps getting better and better and better, and I am so impressed by how much progress it's made. But,
Hmm.
like, again, it's like a great example of knowing, like, how far it can scale. So yeah, you might be able to whack out a project that meets the needs of a business unit sometimes, and then someone's like, oh, let's take that same app and let's scale it. And next thing, everyone's looking at each other going like, oh, it doesn't really scale. And so now, so it's got, again, like everything else, I think what the important
Right.
takeaway in all of this thing, I think, is about kind of like knowing what the end game is, and if what you're working on is going to get you there. And if you're at 50% and you're banging your head against a wall trying to solve an AI problem with generative AI,
Hmm.
keep in mind that was the easy 50. And the next
Hmm.
50 is going to be exponentially more complicated to get there. And so it doesn't mean you need to abandon it, but it might mean you need to sort of side rail it and maybe invest less resources in certain cases. It's okay to have a portfolio of projects, but not not to put everything into one thing, trying to get, diminishing return and, an aspiring ROI that may never exist.
Perfect. Perfect segue. AI in the White House. All right. So there was a recent White House AI action plan entitled Winning the AI Race, America's AI Action Plan. Now, it purportedly does three things. The first is accelerating innovation, which includes deregulation, free speech protections, ensuring government contracts only go to AI developers whose models are free from ideological bias, which is really interesting, and open source support. Number two, building American AI infrastructure. This includes data centers, skilled trades, and creating world-class data sets to support AI research and development. And number three, leading in international diplomacy and security, which includes AI export strategy, partnering with industry to export secure full-stack AI products, global standards, promoting American AI governance models and standards abroad, and combating deepfakes and other synthetic content. Brian, your thoughts?
I am super encouraged, I guess I'll say, by this move. I think at the end of the day, it's policy, right? So, policy means nothing until it's, converted into action. And so, I mean, the trick is to sort of convert all this into actionable intel, if you will, or efforts. And that's going to only happen sort of with collaboration and partnership with with private industry. And so to me, this is great. I think it's pivotal. I think, reducing areas that might impede progress in some of these areas, I think is important. I mean, obviously, it's important to have safeguard certain elements of this. I mean, I think if you look at Europe, they're taking a much more cautious stand, which is, they typically do. But again, a little bit in Europe, they can kind of afford to, because they can really kind of piggyback off of the entrepreneurial efforts, if you will, of the United States in many cases. And so, I think they're taking a more cautious sort of, strategic pause, if you will, in some cases. And also, and I think the good thing about having two Western kind of cultures doing those things is that, the US and others can learn from what they're doing relative to safeguard things. Whether if you think back to GDPR, if you think back to other things, they do a pretty thoughtful job of ensuring that there's protections where appropriate. We haven't always sort of advanced that as quickly as we probably should. But I think when it comes to AI, I think we're going to learn a lot in that regard. But more importantly, I think in the near term, it's I love the idea of sort of this infusing of energy and putting our shoulder behind it. I think it'll hopefully unleash funding with capital markets and other areas. Not that we were lacking funding, but the point really being is that having a White House that's kind of all in is a great signal that to the appropriate companies to kind of really continue to invest and make those decisions and make education critically important. And these things will ripple through states. And I know there'll be gnashing of teeth, as there always is, on any new kind of policy change and things. But this is not a good, put your head in the sand kind of moment in my mind. This is a figure it out, learn it. Yeah, there's going to be implications on power. If you look at the implications to the power grid and the amount of energy we need. I mean, you read some staggering statistics about energy draw over the next, 5 to 10 years. But what's interesting, it'll also fuel, experimentation and innovation. Like you see a renewal, understanding and appreciation for nuclear power, maybe nuclear power kind of in a smaller, more contained package in some cases. And so I think these are the kinds of things that fuel our society's, efforts to continue to kind of grow. It'll grow GDP over time. And I think it's pivotal that the US be kind of a thought leader in this space.
From a CIO's perspective, someone like you who's got their head down, helping support the business, doing the things that you guys are doing day in and day out. Is this something that, in terms of like, how does this impact you today? Is this something that you just sort of keep your eye on? Or are there actions that you can take today with information and news like this that's being announced?
Yeah, I think it's just a reminder to all of us that are in the business of the importance of these of AI and evolution of AI. I mean, keep in mind the generative AI stuff's only been, while it's been labs for a long time, we've only seen the light of day for the last 3-ish years in some
Right.
respects. And oh my goodness, that's what a remarkable progress in 3+ years, right? So I think it's a reminder that this is real, it's here to stay. And if you've been kind of on the sidelines, it's time to sort of, move your chips in and start to play.
Yep. Yep. Great. All right. Well, let's move on. So we are continue to be on the AI theme. Obviously, yeah, AI is the most dominating factor that's going on in our technology lives today. And so the last article we're going to touch on here is the article that came out. It was TechCrunch article this week by a gentleman by the name of Maxwell Zeff. I want to make sure I get these names right. It was called Inside OpenAI's Quest to Make AI Do Anything for You, and how OpenAI's first reasoning model sparked Silicon Valley's obsession with general purpose AI agents and what comes next. The quote here that I picked up was, quote, "Eventually you'll just ask the computer for what you need and it'll do all of these tasks for you," said OpenAI's CEO Sam Altman at the company's first developer conference in 2023. So keep in mind that this was almost or around 2 years ago. Goes on to say, quote, "These capabilities are often talked about in the AI field as agents. The upsides of this are going to be tremendous," end quote. Then it goes on to talk about the great strides in reasoning, chain of thought, and other really amazing and impressive stuff that's been going on since then and has been made available today. But I think that I picked this one because I've been diving into AI. We had Vala on as our first guest, and one of the things that he said that really impressed me was we asked him the question about what's the one thing that you want to share with everybody, and he thought about it for a moment, and he said, from an executive standpoint, or CIO or IT leadership standpoint, don't delegate this, right? Make sure you're investing as much time as you possibly can, and I'm paraphrasing here, your own time to dive into AI, work on it, make things work, see what you can get. So I took this to heart. In addition to helping manage a lot of AI initiatives that are going on with my clients and things like that, and there are a lot going on, and I'm starting to see some realities, like just today's realities, and I know it's moving really, really fast, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So just a quick story. We announced the CIOproject.com here this week, and I actually was the one that built the CIOproject.com. Now, ordinarily, I would have just outsource this and got someone to build it and all that kind of stuff. But I've been hearing, hey, you can build a website in 10, 20 minutes, all of that kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, let's see if this is the case. So I dove in, right? I dove in to build the website. I can tell you that in terms of using AI, an AI engine with an AI model to build the website, I literally did it with 3 prompts. So what you see today, so if you go in there, log into the CIO, just go to the CIOproject.com, what you see there was coded in about 20 minutes with 3 prompts. So from that standpoint, it was amazing. I was like, this is so great. I was, having a really good time with it. And all of a sudden my mind is, and then I can do this, and then I can do this, and then I can do this. So I was getting really excited with it. But then came the time to deploy it, right? And I can just tell you right now that the deployment was just a complete shit show, right? I won't go into all the ugly details because just for sake of time, but the act of trying to get the code from the engine, from the model, deployed to a repository, in this case we're using GitHub, and then get that repository connected to the hosting site, then the DNS part of it, right, with GoDaddy and all that kind of stuff, was just a complete mess. AI was walking me through it. The code was erroring. We tried to fix the code, redeploy it. And then, you know how AI is super polite, I'm really sorry this happened. And
seems like you might be struggling, Howie.
Yeah, exactly. And I understand your frustration. And, but as I've looked at it, I know exactly what's wrong. And here's the funny part. I guarantee you this will work. Well, 18 iterations later, I noticed a couple things. One, we weren't getting it fixed. Like the code kept erroring. And 2, the more that I worked in that thread with the AI, the more confused it was getting. And it's interesting because we're working on some projects with some clients. One in particular, I can't talk about the specifics, but I'm working on a project with a client right now where it's going to take action to take information and then decide, okay, this information belongs in this category and this information belongs in that category. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to move it to another system and like open up a ticket and stuff like that. Really, really great stuff. Same problem we're having there is we're working with the developers. They're talking a lot about how the AI is getting confused. it still has a long way to go. I mean, that's kind of my takeaway in this whole thing. Like, if any of you are worried about losing your jobs today, like, it's not going to be today, right? I understand that it's moving quickly. I understand that it's evolving quickly. I understand that it's getting better very quickly, but it really does have a long, long way to go. I don't know, Brian, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think your findings, I think, are certainly accurate in some respects. I
Hmm.
think, a lot of it's like depends on the tool and what you're doing. I do think
Hmm.
that on a tool by tool basis, the challenge with any of that stuff, think about it, is you're trying to build a website, even if
Right.
you think about, different tools that have been successful over the years and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all so different, have so many permutations and things. The thought that you're going to just, easily do it it's almost humorous in a way, right? Like
Right. Right.
it's always going to turn into an 80-20 rule where it's good at the first 80 and it's problematic on the 20 in my mind. Not always, but
Right.
in time that 20 will become 10 and hopefully 5 and, maybe we'll get
Yeah.
closer to 0 over
Well, it's
time.
interesting because in this particular use case, I would say the 80/20 was actually flipped, right? So, it built the code, that was great. That was the 20%, but the deployment was the 80% of the work.
Oh, yeah,
And,
well, yeah.
so,
Yeah, I do
um,
think though that your second point though about, the impact on resources though
yeah.
is a little bit different. I mean, because some of it is real, right? I mean, like,
Hmm.
or much of it's real. If you think about tools, whether it's like Cursor or others that make software developers much much more productive and efficient, and
Hmm.
you think about other products and ways that we can sort of advance capabilities that didn't exist before. If we can
Right.
sort of, where we would apply, human logic to do matching and assessments and other, as a whole host, obviously, of jobs. There's actually a
Yeah.
great article I read. I wish I kind of had pulled it out recently, where they kind of talked about which jobs are most likely to be impacted by AI. And we've all seen lists like this, but
Yeah.
I thought it was a really well done one. And if you start looking at that list, there's a lot of things on there that make you kind of scratch your head and think, I didn't even think of that, and so I think some of it's real, but like, honestly, like the internet, like mobility, like a lot of past technologies, I'm a huge believer that that new technologies invoke new services, evoke new job opportunities, evoke new
Yep.
businesses, new lines of business. I mean, areas that we never thought of before will become much, much more. We'll think back on some of them and think, oh, how do we ever get along before we ever had that? I mean,
Hmm.
what we would have ever done if food didn't get delivered, or if we didn't have Amazon, or we didn't have this, or didn't have that? And if you think of it, and I suspect it'll be very much like that. The one
Yeah.
variable though
100%.
that's going to come out of all this though is that we want to create a learning culture, because the one common that these all have in common, that take Vala's judgment to heart if you're a technologist, which
Hmm.
is, take this stuff seriously. If you think about,
Yeah.
like, what's happening with, and we'll talk about this in just another segment here, but just a moment. But if you think of what's happening in sort of the talent rush, if you will, that we're seeing with some of these different companies, like, if you're not taking this serious, like, this is such a great opportunity, but you want to be a leader, not a follower. If this is what you do for a living,
Yep.
if you want to be a technologist, embrace.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I think I rant a little bit about this, and the frustrating moments come out, but the experience was invaluable. Like, I am so glad that I took the 18 hours that it took to try to get this thing fixed. I learned so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Go
can't you
ahead.
see a path forward too, Howie? Like, don't you look at it now and kind of go look at it and sort of say, oh, if it just did this, this, and this in the
Hmm.
next iteration, then wow, I would have gone from X percent to Y percent. And
Yeah.
so I think the thing that's encouraging is that a lot of the capabilities that you would want it to be able to handle, if you're picking the right product and tools,
Right.
they're achievable. They're not,
Right.
a lot. It's not like the old days where you're hoping for some, this is like a miracle, and you have to swing for the fences, so to speak, in order
Yeah.
for you to be successful.
Well, I
You
think,
can sort of see a path forward on many of
yeah.
these.
And I think, to be specific for any of those that are, curious, I did the way that I ended up solving it was I actually brought in Ben, who's Ben, but he's a developer, he's a software developer, and he's an AI developer, and so we've been working together. So he dove in to save me, and it was two things that I really learned from this. One was, how the code works what to do when it's getting confused, and also the where AI isn't. So like when you say what the next iteration is going to do, right? Like for me, the building the code is great. It's like what Ben was telling me was, I know this is kind of like crazy and it seems like the code errors and then you have to fix it and then you have to fix it. And the other thing that we had to do is like we had to start new AI chat threads because it would get confused. And he's like, I do this all the time. And so I'm like, man, I don't know how you deal with this. He goes, well, what you have to understand is that even with all of this, I'm writing code and building it in a tenth of the time than I used to. And he goes, and the guys that are working for me, if I find out they're not using AI to generate the initial code, he goes, I really get on their case because I know it's going to take them 10 times longer to get to this point, right? And so that was actually one of the big takeaways for me. I think the next takeaway for me was that when you're talking about deployments, right, that is really the next iteration to me, Brian, where like when you get to deployments, now you're talking about multiple platforms, right? So the code is built on one platform, right? The repository is on another platform. Where it's going to be hosted is yet on another platform, and the DNS is yet on another platform, right? So,
Sure.
I'm really going to be keeping an eye out for where is the, getting back to the article, right? AI's open quest, where it's going to do everything for you. Where is the solution that's going to be able to really pick up the code and then go, okay, now I'm going to go to these 5 other platforms and don't worry about it. It's all done. So that's what I'm keeping my eye out for, just to be
Yeah,
really, really specific.
and the thing is, I mean, in your case, the thing that's important too that you discovered too is that you
Mhm.
kind of knew when to reach out for help, right?
Yeah,
Because
well, there's that. Yeah.
and if you think about it, there's both kind of if you're doing this personally versus on a corporate level, you kind of it's
Mhm.
like everything else. It's like you need to kind of know because it might turn out if you're doing this on a personal level that you just need to know when it's okay to just abandon the work and maybe pursue a different path. Maybe it's
Yeah.
maybe just kind of go, you know what? I really wanted to try this, but I'm going to go back to like a WordPress template or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
on a
Yeah.
corporate level, it's also important to kind of know, like, okay, I've reached a point where I need a developer. I reached a point where I need someone from QA or someone else to be able to kind of test or do some regression testing on different things. So to me, I think there's learnings. I think go back to Altman for a minute. I think, well, unlike you and I, he does not struggle marketing. And and self-promoting, right? So I mean, that is clearly part of his job, but he clearly knows what it takes to kind of, promote his business. I mean, I just saw like he's looking, working at a $500 million valuation. I think I read the
It's
other day.
crazy.
That's
It's
shocking.
crazy.
But point is, I mean, he does a good job of selling it. And I think he was also referencing sort of the value of agents and what that's going to mean in the future. And Vala talked a little bit about
Right.
that too in her
Yeah.
first
Yeah. Yeah.
segment. And it's real and it's
Mhm.
going to be transformational. And we will all have different agents that perform different services on our behalf. And I think we're going to look back on this. And
Yeah.
what I'm excited about is the impact to our country and in some cases the world. I mean, GDP is going to grow because we're going to make people more productive. And some of these different agents that we do today, we're going to think to ourselves, like, just like when you started having mobility, right? And you're just going to say, oh, like, what are the hours of operation of this place or place a reservation? I mean, today you
Yeah.
do all that by yourself a little bit, even though the tools exist, which is remarkable. But now it's
Mhm.
now it's kind of like, oh, I want to have dinner. Oh, would you like me to book a reservation for you? Yes, I would. Or, like there's so many things that agents can do that some of them already exist. Others that you'll have agents calling agents and other sort of things. So I think there's the world of productivity and efficiency is about to take a dramatic accelerated step forward. And for that, I'm incredibly excited, and I think it's going to provide opportunities for people to continue to kind of, get more work done, if you will, at sort of, and kind of hopefully be able to kind of hand off some of this work to some non-human workers, if in that
And
model.
that is a perfect segue to our next topic, which is the talent code. And so, Brian, we talked about this in our first episode. Really, I thought you did a beautiful job talking about how important this was. We talked about mentoring and those kinds of things, but you also thought it was important enough to bring
Yeah.
back up today, and you had some more thoughts. Take it away.
Yeah, I was thinking as we were talking to, if you were listening to this, we made reference to job number one for CIOs to understand the business. Well, I'm not sure which is job number 1 and 2, but attracting, developing, and retaining talent is pivotal to any successful CIO. I mean, you should never stop recruiting. But the thing is, I learned something recently, like, because when I think that way, I tend to think, how do I make my team more successful? Like, how do I, perhaps get them mentors? How do I eliminate, hurdles for folks and things like that? But I was listening to a podcast the other day when my wife and I were traveling, and it was a spiritual podcast. And so I'm taking some spirituality here and applying it to business in some ways. And
Sure.
and the person speaking made the comment about something similar, like, hey, we all are pretty cognizant of how we help others. And and I was thinking, yep, I understand that, relative to, I was thinking both personal and professional. And then it made a comment about, like, how do you impede others? And I was thinking, wow, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. We don't flip it on its head a little bit and say, wow, how do I impede the growth of others? And, and I think when I reflect back on that a little bit, it's like, where are we an impediment and a hurdle to our teams? Are we not putting them in the best light for them to be successful? I mean, it's sometimes easier to get them professional development, and that's all well and good, but are we a blocker? Are they on a faster trajectory than we are, in some respects? I mean, we as CIOs and others, evaluate talent for a living, right? But we
Right.
don't always look inward, and we don't always put ourselves in the position, maybe at the CEO or other C-level executives or the board, and say, am I the right person to continue to lead the business? And am I doing everything I can to make my team as good or better than I am? And things like that. And, I think back to, like, what was the expression with, like, George III with George Washington? Like, first he gives up command of the Confederate army after,
Right.
defeating, the British. And he'd be like the greatest man in the world if he were to do that. And then he follows it up with, not seeking a third term when the country was just founded, and
hmm
when you think about those things, like, it's kind of like knowing, not just, and I don't mean this just for a CIO, by the way, it's just kind of like knowing in yourself a little bit about, like, where is your ceiling, and are you well positioned for the future? And are you, we all have a tendency to want to kind of hang on longer probably than we should in some cases. But I think it's really important, not just altruistically here, but I think it's really important that we're thinking about, what makes the most sense for our business, and how do we align for long-term success? And, what does that mean relative to our people, and how do we put them in positions to be successful and to reach their potential? I think that's ultimately the end objective. And whether
hmm
it's reaching their potential in your company, or reaching that potential in another company, I think, the most you can do in our respective roles is to make sure that your people are successful, and that benefits your company. Sometimes the benefits might be to somebody else at some other company
hmm
because there's only so many positions at the top. But again, a quick reflection on something outside of this kind of normal traditional kind of environment that I thought was and kind of a thoughtful way for people to think about how they're leading their teams, and are they doing everything not to become an impediment for the growth and development of others?
I think that's just really actually beautiful words because it's interesting. So we talk, again, technologists, right? We're in the information technology business and we love technology. And, the dominating topic right now is artificial intelligence and how it's going to change. And, we can't get away from it. It dominates our agenda. So much is focused and indexed on how it's going to do work for us and all of that kind of stuff. And yet, your pervasive message is people are the most important thing.
Yeah, and you know what too? I was thinking as you were just talking, Howie, like, the things that give me most, satisfaction in some ways is when I think about other leaders that have worked for me, that I've been able to, help it in their careers, and as they've gone on to become CIOs themselves, or CTOs, or other types of thought leaders in their respective areas, and that is so rewarding. So, to
hmm
me, it's so important to keep that in mind, because I think,
Yeah.
as much we owe it to our companies to keep the best team on the field, and to help advance the company. We also owe it to individuals to make sure that we're
Yeah.
being thoughtful about their respective careers. So, and sometimes, by the way, you have to make, difficult decisions for them because they don't see it.
Okay.
And so it's not all, like, oh, putting in position for the next CO position. Sometimes it's like letting them know that this is maybe not the right industry or not the right field, or they've got some, flaw that's going to unfortunately, limit their growth or development and things like that. So anyways, just as part of our sprint, I just thought I'd share sort of a recent moment that I thought would be applicable to our listeners.
I love it. And speaking of people and the importance of
Uh,
staff and staff development, astronomer, our final sprint. We can't get away from a news segment without talking about this guy. The jokes and memes are priceless, but this is really simply to me a tale as old as time, right? What are your thoughts on this from a leadership perspective, Brian?
well, I'm so glad their board moved quickly. And
Okay.
I've read all sorts of articles and I've read comments that people put in there about, like, hey, he can do whatever he wants to do in his personal life. And I'm like,
Okay.
yeah, and I just, my opinion, completely, I don't disagree with that. Like, if you're the CEO of a company, not to mention, like having a relationship with the head of HR, which makes it even more egregious in some ways.
More ironic.
Yeah, well, you represent your company, right? You're a ambassador to your organization, and
Yeah.
I think companies that want to be held in high regard, hold their people in high regard, and I think there's an expectation that you operate in your life in that manner. And so, to me, I thought they moved quickly and deliberately, and I thought that was the prudent thing to do. And some of the whining and mashing of teeth you hear these days around this topic, in my mind, is just misguided. And
Okay.
and to me, it's like, I think it's a reminder to people, and that boards have a responsibility, and responsibilities to make sure that they're keeping their company first, and that they may
Yeah.
have really high regard for this executive relative to how they do their job in a business
Yeah.
level, but these kinds of things supersede all those.
Yeah, no, I hear you. My thoughts are in a little bit of a different space. I really look at this from a human element, right? Like I have a ton of compassion for the human condition. And so I always want to give that compassion and just say, kind of like, I can understand certain things that are taking place and struggles that people are having and why they might make bad decisions. I think that has to be tempered, though, with integrity. I think the one thing that I like to say is that whenever you have a problem, whatever that problem is in your life, there is always 101 ways that you can deal with that problem with integrity, because it all comes down to integrity. And that's what I would try to encourage everybody is just what is the action that I'm taking in integrity right now? Is this something that is operating in the shadows, or am I avoiding what it is that I need to be avoiding? Right. So just really sit back and think about the problems that we all have, the struggles that we all have, forks in the road that we all come to, and just think about it from an integrity standpoint. To me, it all comes down to integrity.
Well said.
All right, guys, I'd like to leave you with this quote from Esther Perel. Remember what Esther said, quote, "Our partners do not belong to us. They are only on loan with an option to renew or not." And we're out.
Very good. Thanks, Sammy.